Entrepreneurial Finance, Chapter 26. Bobby Bonilla Day. What a professional baseball player can teach us about the time value of money. Picture yourself as a professional baseball player. It's January 2020. You'll turn 38 years old next month. You've been traded back to the New York Mets, a team that signed you to a record contract 10 years ago. But you've played for 3 teams since, and your skills are not what they used to be. The Mets think you are no longer good enough to make the team. The Mets want to cut you, but they owe you $5.8 million on the last year of their contract. This could be the last paycheck you'll ever see as a professional baseball player. But the Wilpon family that owns the Mets doesn't want to part with $5.8 million if it doesn't have to. You have some money left over from the big contracts earlier in your career, so you don't need money right now. Your agent and the Mets come up with a deal. Instead of paying you $5.8 million now, instead, when you're 38 years old, the Mets will pay you $1.19 million for 25 years, starting in 2011 and ending in 2035, for a total of $28 million. You'll receive your last check when you're 72 years old. Essentially, the Mets are proposing to pay you an annual interest rate of 8% on your $5.8 million if you allow them to invest the money until 30 plus years in the future. Why would the Mets even make you this offer? They don't want to spend $5.8 million. Why would they offer $28 million? The answer is the time value of money. While they plan to pay you an 8% interest rate on the money they owe you, they plan to invest the money at 10%. If all goes according to plan, the $5.8 million will go to a pot worth $28 million for you, and they'll make several million dollars more on the money by investing it at a higher rate than they promised you. What would you do if you were Bobby Bonilla? Should you take the $5.8 million now, or should you take the $28 million later? This is also a time value of money problem. Would he rather have the money now or the money later? Or which alternative provides the most money? What are the risks? There are risks that the Mets, for some reason, are not able to pay you, or that you die before you've been paid all the money. Which alternative is less risky? There's also a third alternative. You could take the $5.8 million from the Mets today and invest it yourself over the next 35 years. But this scenario is complicated by taxes. If you take the $5.8 million today, you'll owe taxes on the money today. If the tax rate is 30%, you might only have $4 million or so left to invest. If this money is invested over the same 35-year term as the offer from the Mets, you'll earn about $23 million over the 35 years rather than the $28 million promised by the Mets. So what did Bobby do? Well, he takes the $28 million over 35 years offered by the Mets, giving rise to what we now know as Bobby Bonilla Day. Every July 1st, from 2011 to 2035, the Mets give Bobby Bonilla a check for $1.19 million. He received his first check 9 years after he stopped playing baseball, and will receive his last check 35 years after he last played professional baseball. This has become a media event in the baseball world and also generates many kudos for his agent, Dennis Gilbert, who negotiated the contract. So how have things worked out since that day in 2000 when Bobby Bonilla agreed to defer the last of his compensation from the Mets? First, Bobby Bonilla wasn't quite as washed up as the Mets thought. He played 2 more years of professional baseball, earning more than $1 million. Second, the Mets ownership was not as smart as they thought they were. The Wilpons had invested their money, including the money due on a Bobby Bonilla contract, in an investment fund with Bernie Madoff. During the 2008 recession, it turned out that Bernie Madoff had not in fact been investing the money and earning 10% like he was telling everybody, but in fact had been running a giant Ponzi scheme, basically taking all the investors' money. The Wilpons did not earn 10% on the money that they had invested and were hoping to use to cover the 8% payments on the contract to Bobby Bonilla. One additional outcome of the 2008 recession was that interest rates dropped significantly. While interest rates of 8% to 10% were common in the early 2000s, by the 2010s, interest rates of 2 and 3% were much more common. Bobby Bonilla would not have been able to take the payment from the Mets in 2000 and invested at a consistent 8% rate that would get him $23 million by 2035. He made out much better by taking the $28 million guaranteed offer from the Mets. This example shows why it's important to understand the time value of money and to understand the risks in receiving money later rather than sooner or sooner rather than later. In the case of this transaction, Bobby Bonilla correctly assumed that the risk of the Mets not paying was minimal, while the risk of investing the money himself was greater. The Wilpon family thought they had found an arbitrage in the market that would allow them to make some money while delaying payment to Bobby Bonilla, but it turned out the risk of investing money with Bernie Madoff was greater than they knew. The winner in this transaction is Bobby Bonilla, whose agent understood the time value of money, and the losers are the Mets and the Wilpon family, who misunderstood the risks of their investment strategy.